So today, this is going to be a training about everything that I have learned from hypnotherapy, shadow work, and developmental psychology in order to create impactful, permanent, and lasting change. This is the full comprehensive guide, and we actually have a bonus section at the end. So when it comes to hypnotherapy, I've learned from a few key flavors of hypnotherapy. It's such a big topic. It's like all therapy and like all inner work. The main guys that I learned from: James Tripp, the Jackman brothers, Scott Jansen, as well as a background in provocational therapy and NLP schools of thought. But it's more schools of thought, philosophy. NLP flavored hypnotherapy is what you can kind of call it, because I didn't have any direct training from people who were just doing neuro-linguistic programming, which is what NLP stands for. You have to see the whole picture. That's why this channel is structured this way. That's why the content is structured this way. You have to see the whole picture in order to make sure that you're not the blind leading the blind. What do I mean by this? This is not marketing. This is not sales. This is your own personal development, your own self-actualization. The problem with, if you're just one step ahead, if you just see the pathway a little bit in front of you, the problem with that is as follows. You could be leading yourself off a cliff. Now, this is okay when you're doing something which is more surface level, like business, like marketing, like sales, like whatever. The reason why I'm using that is because this is a concept which is sold a lot in marketing and business coaching. Oh yeah, you only have to be one step ahead of your client in order for you to sell them. It's basically a way for you to buy their program and justify the fact that maybe you have an objection that you are not experienced enough. When it comes to this kind of thing, guys, you need to make sure you have all your I's dotted and your T's crossed. Because if you don't, you could be leading yourself off a cliff. And rather than just maybe your business blowing up, which I'm not trying to say isn't a big deal, because it'll probably be a big thing, but it's not tied to your sense of identity, like who you are as a person. We can do that later, don't worry, a lot of people do that. What I mean is that your personality at a personality level should not get affected unless you have shadows which precondition you to get affected by that kind of thing. However, when it comes to self-actualization, if you lead yourself off the deep end, it's very, very hard to come back from that, because it's not just the thing that you were doing now has been thrown off a cliff, you are thrown off a cliff. And unless we grow wings and fly back up, we're going to have a very hard landing. What did I learn from all of these NLP, hypnotherapy, provocational therapy? What did I learn from all of this amalgamation of teachers? What I learned from them is just how malleable the mind actually is. What this means is I learned how we learn, how we continue to learn, how we hold on to the things that we have learned, and how our mind is constantly changing. Nothing is static, guys. We will always continue to learn. Just because one thing happened one time, which is what a lot of our beliefs are structured around, or one time someone said I was ugly and now I just believe I'm ugly. There's so many times where something similar happens and we don't develop things from that. We don't develop insecurities, we don't develop blind spots. It's just a lot of the time it's actually chance that makes something stick. Chance and also our preconditioned causes and conditions of our mind which keep us there. We need to accept this first frame, otherwise the rest of the work will be really, really hard. Now I have my free product, which I was going to sell for free to €500, the most practical guide to shadow work on the internet. If you're having trouble accepting the premise that the mind is malleable and that change is not only possible, but it's something that we're doing all of the time, then before you dive into anything, that is the belief that you have to work on. And the reason why I mentioned my guide is because it gives you the step-by-step game plan of how you would actually do that, as well as everything that we're learning here. So we're not going to go over that specific thing right now because we have a whole training that we have to get through, but that's something that's super, super important. It's why I've included it in here. We need to accept this frame that the mind is malleable, we can change, things aren't static, things aren't the same, in order to make progress. So the other thing you'll hear about this kind of stuff, and the reason why I wanted to include this, is the idea of trance, the idea that we can go into a trance-like state and we can get A, B, or C result. And it's the trance that's doing the work rather than us doing the work. I wanted to completely diffuse and dissolve that idea. Why? Because trance is something that's real. It's something that I work with all the time, both for myself and my clients. But it's not something magical, it's not something mystical, it's not something that we should be going out of our way in order to achieve. This is the idea that I got from Scott Jansen at Advanced Conversational Hypnotherapy, as well as James Tripp, Hypnotherapy Without Trance. Trance is inherently limiting. If you're trying to go into a specific state, a state which is impermanent, temporary, and something which we can't directly control, if you're trying to use that, then it's something that's very volatile. But the second part of this is it's not you that's changing the beliefs, it's the trance. that's changing it. You are projecting power, you're projecting personal power onto this thing, okay? So for those of you that don't know what trance is, I should probably explain it. It's essentially the idea that hypnotherapy is the tool that puts you into something called a hypnotic trance. What this hypnotic trance does is it makes your mind open to suggestion. And when you get suggestion, your mind changes. So you get put into trance, someone says, you are good enough. Because you're in trance, you accept that, you get rid of the old belief, and suddenly we wake up and we're happy, and we're fine, we're dandy. Sounds like magic, because it is. It's mystical thinking. It's not to say that it can't have some benefit, but I'll put it like this. If you're following somebody who just wants to put you into trance and get rid of all of your issues, let's say they are able to do that. In the best possible case, they are able to actually do that. Here's the problem. The problem is that it's not you that overcame the issue. It's somebody else that did it for you. So the storyline gets reinforced that I am not capable of coming over my own problems, becoming over my own obstacles. I need to go and pay somebody to do it for me, which leads into a helplessness that can be developed over a time period. How can we approach trance? Trance is a really nice state for us to be in while we're working through our problems, okay? For you guys, I don't want you to worry about it at all. You've got enough to worry about, okay? I just wanted to put this in here as just kind of something which maybe people are coming from shadow work, from a background of hypnotherapy, what they can expect from this. So like I said, change is our natural state of mind. It's more effortless to change than it is to stay static. And what I wanted to get to in this section, which will be the second most important, is the actual mechanism of how we can get deeper into our problems without creating more of a storyline. And that is the art of asking questions, mechanical questions versus reality cementing questions. We want to avoid reality cementing questions, and we want to instead ask mechanical questions. So if we're working for an issue, am I good enough or not? We do not want to be asking a why question. Why am I not good enough? Because that cements the reality that we are not good enough. That's what why does. It puts the identity, it puts the I in a question. Instead, what a mechanical question is a what or how question. What is it that makes me think that I am not good enough? How is it that I feel that I am not good enough? These get us deeper into the problem without getting us bogged down into the identity, into the self, into the meaning making. That is, that I am not worthy, I am not good enough, that I am not any of these kind of things. We want to avoid that. Instead, we go mechanical questions first. Just by asking and directing your intention and engaging with yourself with mechanical questions, instead of asking yourself why all the time, because for some reason we just have a bias to ask why. I think it's because of the identity part of it, but again, that's my own hypothesis. You're welcome to disagree, but I think it's because why innately gives us a sense of self, gives us a sense of meaning, which is why we ask it more. If you just stop asking yourself why questions and instead rephrase them with what and how question, you create distance between yourself and your problems, which means that there's less of an identity, which means that over time, you have less of an attachment to this thing, which makes the next phase much, much easier. And the next phase is going to go into, well, what's the direction which we ask these questions, and then what's the direction that we're going to move towards in order to release a certain introject. So in conclusion, the mind can be viewed as a system, a complex adaptive system that is based on past rules, events and timelines and experiences. And it can build a different persona. And instead of this cycle happening passively, we can actively change it. We can actively change how our identity is being shaped, even now in this moment. And we do this through questions. Getting curious about the problem rather than the solution to the problem. If we knew the solution, this wouldn't be a problem anymore, it would have been solved, okay? We don't. We do not know the solution 9 times out of 10. So let's stop asking ourselves questions about the solution. Instead, we get more curious about the problem. We do that with mechanical questions, what and how questions. And the problem is this equation, if you're confused about what the problem is that you're working with. It's what happens versus what sustains what happens equals the long-term problem. So if I break this down even more, there's the event or there's the series of events that caused us to believe that we're not good enough, okay? Then, like I said at the beginning, this doesn't just happen and now we're just stuck with it. There is an ecosystem up here which sustains this pattern. It goes round and round and round, like a merry-go-round. We need to also get clear on what's keeping this pattern stuck, because there's a lot of things that maybe could demonstrate to us that we're not worth something, But we're not hung up on those, so why is this one special? There's something about this one which is slotted into the ecosystem of our mind, and we have to see what that ecosystem is. Which leads to the second part, which is what I learned from my other mentor, Kim Barter, was shadow work, psychotherapy-based shadow work. This is something which I learned second after I had all my background and all the hypnotherapy and provocative therapy and all that kind of stuff. And this is what's going to be an absolute game changer for you in terms of if you've done hypnotherapy, NLP, anything, any kind of internal work, seen some results, but not really gotten the full transformational change that you were promised. And he gets it from Gestalt therapy, which is in Gestalt therapy, it details projections and introjections, and then parts work is obviously very, very popular nowadays, which he calls split ego states. And we need to understand these distinctions in order to do and actually generate transformational, internal transformational change that's lasting, permanent, and actually doesn't just change us incrementally, but makes a massive difference in our life. If we do not understand this, we are either not healing something, in the best case, we're not healing something properly. In the worst case, we're actually making it stronger. So what is an introjection, projection, and split ego state? An introjection is probably what I would say when I work with myself and when I work with my clients, is the thing which is holding most people back. I'm not sure about the amount, like how much is divided behind. All I know is that the root of an issue, the introject, most likely is what's there. And then it's followed by a part, a split ego state. So an introjection is a lesson, essentially, that we have taken from the world. So an example of an introjection is, I think we've all had this memory, when there's a hot stove and we kind of like place our hand on it as a kid, right? We place our hand on it, it's hot, we burn ourselves, and we have the lesson taught to us by the environment, stoves are hot, I'm not going to place my hand there anymore. Either period or when it's on. That's an introjection. We have, from that experience, that painful experience, introjected the lesson. Now this is not a shadow, okay? This is not an insecurity, this is not something which is false. It can become something like that. It can become like maybe you associate just any kind of flat surface with burning yourself, and then maybe you would develop a phobia or a psychological condition. But that lesson in and of itself is not a shadow. It's something which is there to protect us. That's why we have the function of introjections, okay? Now, if we get told by our mom one day when she's super annoyed and in a fit of rage, or our father, that we are not good enough and we never will be, and they just say it once, we can, from that moment, have it introjected to us, or like a client I was working with today, kind of his relationship with his mum has not been the best over time. Was kind of a learned thing over time, that he wasn't good enough, that he wasn't worthy. This is an example of an introject being a shadow. It's not something functional. There's no function to believing that we're not good enough, okay? And continuing to have that. There's a function to not touching a hot stove. This is a shadow, this is an insecurity, this is something which becomes part of our narrative, part of our identity. This is an introject that needs to be healed. How do we heal an introject? We give it back to where it came from. Now, like I said in my product, my free product, we go into excruciating details, a 2.5 hour training. It's a live stream where clients are asking me questions about how to do certain things. So we go much, much more into detail there. I'll just let you sign up to that and you can get the actual process of how to let go. But just remembering that distinction, guys, that's how we heal it, will fundamentally change how you start doing internal work and how you start actually generating change for yourself and getting released from these bad beliefs. Second is a projection. Projection is the opposite of an introjection. It's when we have something that we don't want to deal with inside, okay? And because we don't want to deal with it inside, we project it outward. So an example for this would be, we see somebody who's acting really confident, and because we have an introject that we're not good enough and we don't want to deal with that, we don't want to really own that fact because it's difficult to own that. That's why so many people live in confusion and just by getting triggered by things, because it's hard to own up to the fact that, wow, I really do not believe in myself. So we see someone who does believe in themselves, someone who's outwardly very confident, we project that this person is a bad person because we don't have this thing. We see the other person has it, we don't like that. That don't like it turns into, this person's a bad person, this person's arrogant, this person's too full of himself. So the healing modality for that is by re-owning. We have to re-own that. We have to say, wait, it's not this person, it's actually myself. And then the last part is a split ego state or a part, which is when there's been a part of us which has been trapped at an earlier stage, or maybe it's not at an earlier stage, it's just going against what the rest of our system wants. because it's been walled off and it's been shamed or because of some inciting event. And the healing process for that is to integrate it. If you do not have this, it's like using an out-of-date map for internal work. You could run a coaching business just on this, and it would be better than 90% of all internal coaches on the market, period. And I just gave it to you right now for free in a free video. Now you have an up-to-date map. If you do not have this, it'd be like using a 10th century map of England trying to navigate London right now. You just won't be able to do it because you'll be trying to do the letting go thing for a projection or an integration practice with an introject. All of this stuff is super, super harmful, super, super dangerous. You need to know the distinctions. And the main principle of what Kim teaches, I can't give you all of his method because it's not mine to teach, is we're not just trying to fix stuff at symptom level or even an internal mental process level or even a trigger level. What we're trying to do is fix something at the core wound level. There was a core wound that either happened in one time or over a collection of environments and times. We have to identify where that came from. How do we do that? By, oh, look at this. We are going back and we're using the mechanical questions, mechanical versus reality cementing questions, okay? We're using mechanical questions to get there. What happened? Okay, what is it that I believe? How is it that I continue to believe this? Most important one, where did this belief come from? When you start asking these where, what, how questions, mechanical questions, remember no why questions, guys. When I used to teach this in a bit more of a hypnotherapy context, like pure hypnotherapy context, this is something that clients always forgot for some reason. They kept on asking themselves why questions and making the problem worse. We need to just ask the what, where, and how questions. Because if we do not go to the core root of how everything began, what was the inciting event, what's the thing that's sustaining everything, and again, I go into much more detail in this in my product. If we do not do that, then the foundations are never taken out and something new can grow. It's like a weed. You have to take the weeds out by the roots. If you do not take the weeds out from the roots from your garden, I'm not a gardener, but even I know this, then it just comes up somewhere else. It'll just keep on popping up. We have to go to the root cause. It takes longer in the beginning. This is not going to be like a super quick fix, guys, necessarily. It can be, but it's not necessarily. This is something that takes a bit more diligence, takes a bit more patience, takes a bit more practice and consistency at the beginning, but in the long term, which we have to play because we're in the long-term game anyway. Most of us are going to live, hopefully, until we're like 80, knock on wood, okay? We are playing the long game whether we like it or not. In the long term, this will generate much faster and deeper results than anything else that's just working with triggers or symptoms or even mental processes aware. Right? When I say mental process aware, I mean even just working with how our mind processes information. So we can change how our mind might process worth, and that can solve that problem. But if we still have this thing that happened to us that's continuing to create this reality that's making us question worth in some way, it might not be worth anymore around making money, but it might be around looks and attracting somebody. It will always keep on popping up. We have to go root cause first, because when we do that, it creates deeper, lasting, and permanent change. So in conclusion, we have to know what kind of problem we are working with. Once we have identified where it comes from and what kind of problem it is, and in some ways more importantly, what is sustaining this problem, then we can continue. We can do introjection, let go, projection, re-own, split ego state, integrate. Easy. That's how we do that. So we go to the next stage, which is developmental psychology. Stages, international, there's ego development theory by Dr. Suzanne Cook-Greuter, and then there's spiral dynamics by Christopher Cohen and Don Beck. This is so essential for people to understand. If you've noticed, looking around, different people have different perspectives on life, obviously, on an individual level. But there's some trends which you can measure where you can fit people into certain stages. That's why it's called stages. Stages of perspective. This is not a hierarchy of intelligence. This is a hierarchy of how many perspectives we can take on at once. Our complexity of thought. Complexity of thought is not IQ. That's very important to distinguish, okay? Complexity of thought is how many perspectives we can hold at once and what kind of timeline we can hold. That's a very simplified version, but it's what is important right now. The reason why this is important is because if we're trying to work with ourselves and we are just trying to heal the inner child, when we do have maybe a stage of consciousness that is very childlike, there is like a stage of that is like working with a child. That's amazing, that's beautiful. The problem is, not all of our problems are child stage. And if they are, they might be different levels. A 5-year-old is very different to a 9-year-old, is very different to a 3-year-old. It's very different to a 13-year-old. I don't know why I'm just giving odd numbers. We do not want to top-down force what we're working with, okay? So there's some people who say, oh yeah, there's just 3 stages, adolescent, teen, there's a child, and there's an adult, or like a mother, right? We have infinite different stages within us, all with slight nuances and different complexities and all that kind of stuff. Obviously within the stage that we are at, okay? We have to understand developmental psychology, because if we know developmental psychology, we can talk directly to each stage in the way that it wants to be spoken to. How you speak to a 5-year-old is different to how you speak to an adult. Different languaging, different purpose, different way of being around this person. This is the same for ourselves. So ego development theory is the easiest to pick up. The paper is free online. It's by Dr. Suzanne Cook-Reuter. Also spiral dynamics as well. Ego development theory is much more deep. It's more complete, more nuanced, more deep. Essentially what it is the structure of how our ego thinks. So not necessarily the contents, although it covers that as well, but it's about the way in which somebody thinks. So if somebody is at a more conventional stage, okay, this is someone who wants to be a pillar of society, this is someone who wants to start a nuclear family, this is somebody who, whatever maybe religious background they have growing up, whether it's the church, whether it's the mosque, whether it's a Buddhist, right? Whatever it is, they will want to do whatever that group says is the good person to be like. So if they were a Buddhist, it would be living in Thailand, it would be become a monk. If they were a young boy, you have to become a monk at some point during Thailand. Do your service there, then maybe start a family, then maybe help out at the temple every weekend, whatever it would be. I used to live in Thailand, so this is kind of the stuff that if you're a more conservative Buddhist, you would do. That's something that someone at a conventional stage of ego development would be very happy doing and actually put at the priority of their life, because it's conventional to the culture that they are living in. However, if you're a pluralist and you start to see that there's so many different perspectives and there's a relativity to everything, now something that the pluralist stage does is they think that everything is relative, and they don't see that everything is relative is also relative. But they essentially would question this. They would say, well, how has this expectation been formed? Just because something is tradition doesn't mean that that's something that I should just accept blindly and never question. Whereas someone who's at much more of a conventional ego development, a conventional ego state, would not think to question, because it's just something that's not, it's something that's not relevant for them, okay? This is kind of to give you an example of how you would speak to those two people despite them both being adults in a very different way. Obviously, if you wanted to communicate effectively with them. So we have to do that with ourselves. We have to have all of our internal work filtered through this. All of my internal work is filtered through this. That's why it's so effective, you know, in my own stage. I guess I'm being my own salesperson. If somebody doesn't have at least an intuitive understanding of this, they will be very limited in how they can mentor you. They'll be very limited in how they can coach you. They'll be very limited in whatever healing modality or whatever self-actualization modality they give you, it will be limited. So this is why this is so important to include. We can also grade where our problems are. This enables us to find out what their language is, to understand it, and then to talk to whatever the problem is at the stage that they are at. Also lets us set goals that are truly aligned with where we are and where we want to go, eliminating confusion, making sure that all parts, all stages, all levels, all perspectives are catered to and nurtured in the right hierarchy. Because there is a hierarchy. If someone's at a pluralist stage of development, they'd actually challenge that. Although their hierarchy is a flat hierarchy, which is still a hierarchy, and pluralism would be at the top of that hierarchy, paradoxically. This would be absolutely phenomenal for actually deciding what it is you actually want. And if you had conflicting goals, you could see which stage each of them are at, and then make a much more informed decision. This is something that I had to do when I was doing jiu-jitsu. It was very fun, it was very cool. It would be something in spiral dynamics we would call orange stage, red stage, like a combination of the two. But I had something that was calling me that was much deeper, much more open. So that's the thing that I eventually went with. So in conclusion, we understand which stage we are at and what stage maybe a problem we have is at, and then we work with it rather than against it. So we are not using language, we are not talking with it in a manner that it will not understand. We are using its language, we're structuring goals and values around this, okay? So important. Swimming upstream has its place. But that place is very rare and we should use it sparingly. Swimming downstream and downwind is much, much more efficient, and it allows us to use our discipline and willpower for other things. And the bonus section, we're going to be integrating the Dharma, specifically the teachings around waking up to how we are co-creating the reality around us. And I think Buddhism does a very, very good job of explaining this. Like I said, it has my inspirations here, Theravadan Buddhism from the Majjhima Nikaya specifically, and also some stuff from the School of Emptiness, what we would call Vajrayana, Majrayana, or more Vajrayana, which would be Zen. So we need to understand anicca, we need to understand dukkha, and we need to understand anatta. Anicca is the fact that everything is impermanent. This coincides with what we just talked about with hypnotherapy teaching us that the mind is malleable and everything is changing all of the time. Anicca is the reality that nothing is permanent, everything is temporary. Now, if you're maybe a monotheist and you believe that God is permanent, you're welcome to believe that. What I'm just saying, in this world we're living in right now, so you can still hold on to that belief if you want to. What I'm saying is, in this world, nothing is permanent. Okay, we are not permanent, we're aging all the time. Our mind is always running, it's always changing. So if we understand that everything is impermanent, it makes no sense to hold on to this stuff, to believe that it's permanent, to believe that even my sense of identity is permanent, because it's not. This makes change much, much easier to understand. How do we get to these realities? By meditating. I have a ton of videos on meditation, I'll let you get on with it. So we need to understand dukkha. Dukkha means that because things are impermanent, that's how we create suffering for ourselves. Because we do not like to see the things that are impermanent in this world. If I have beauty, let's say I get really narcissistic and I think I'm really beautiful, that beauty over time will fade. At the very least, it will change. Right? Some people are good looking up until they die, but it's in different ways. So if I grow attached to how this face looks, beauty, then that will cause dukkha in the process, because I didn't understand the principle of anicca, that everything is impermanent, and that just by attaching myself to something that's impermanent, it will cause dukkha, it will cause suffering. And from those two, we will understand anatta, which is there is no self here. If we accept this reality, that there is no self here, it makes change much, much easier. Now, it's very, very important that we don't disassociate, and I'll get onto that in a minute, but it makes change much, much easier, because if we are not attached to this self that we are living in, then letting go of a belief that gave us so much purpose and so much identity in the past becomes much, much easier, because there's less attachment overall. Now, we don't want to become Mr. Disassociated, which a lot of Western spiritual teachers are disassociating. How do we do that? Well, we realize that the relative self, we realize that Aaron, we realize that whoever's watching this right now came from consciousness. It came from this fullness. It came from something. If you're a monotheist or if you're religious, you can say it comes from God. It comes from the universe. It comes from whatever. It comes from something which is divine. Okay, so we don't want to disassociate with that. And then I put the last one with a question mark, sunyata, which is emptiness. Sunyata is the Pali word for emptiness, and essentially what it means is seeing the emptiness in everything, including the trauma that we are experiencing in our mind. Not in a disassociative way, okay? I can already see the Western schools of thought just already disassociating just at the thought of that. No, okay? Sunyata is something that's helpful for us to understand in the absolute self, for us to understand in the absolute way. What that means is, in the absolute, in the grand picture, everything is empty and therefore lacks an inherent meaning. However, on the relative level, there's a lot of meaning here. We still have to live through the relative level. So, if we integrate the truth of sunyata, it makes things empty, it makes our experiences more empty, it makes them much, much easier to process, because we're not taking them so personally. Like I said, if you want to understand this a bit more, go and watch my videos on meditation, because then you can actually practice and understand it from an experiential level, not just a theoretical level. Although, unfortunately, I cannot practice for you, so we're just gonna have to go with the theory right now. There is a liberation to the suffering that we are causing ourselves. This sounds really, really conservative. I promise I'm not trying to convert anyone, because I myself am not a Buddhist, okay? But the Four Noble Truths are essentially, there is suffering in this world, there's a cessation to suffering. The cessation to suffering is the Eightfold Path. And the reason why I included that is to give a bit more of an understanding of these four phrases that I just gave you, these four definitions that I just gave you. However, those on their own are the most important. So how does this work with hypnotherapy? How does this work with shadow work? Well, it works by understanding that this person that's experiencing all of this suffering, experiencing whatever insecurities, whatever thing we're going through is something which we can develop less attached to on a general level by understanding that this is not me, this is not mine, this is not myself. I'm not going to disown the fact that I'm going through this and trying to disassociate, but I can understand the absolute reality that this is not me, this is not mine, this is not myself, therefore I should stop taking this thing as personally. This thing that, oh, my mum said and she must have really meant it because she's my mum, no longer has so much weight because I start to realize, well, this meaning that I took on is meaningless anyway. So if I have to work with some kind of constructs in my mind, then I can just let go of that one and let something else take its place. So like I've been saying this whole video, I do have my product out, the most practical guide to shadow work on the internet. It's completely free. I was gonna make it about 300 to 500 euros, but I made it free just for you guys, just as something for the YouTube channel. Please go and check that out if you are really sincere about doing this practice, about actually making real internal change. I have my one-on-one link as well, but I think that is the perfect way to get started. I have everything in that product. I have a 4-week game plan, which will take you from doing absolutely zero practice to having 4 weeks of step-by-step instructions about what to do, as well as the training itself. So go and check that out if this is interesting to you. In conclusion, we are not disassociating from ourselves. We are simply seeing the impersonal nature of self, of ourself, okay? That's anatta. If we see that in the big picture, it makes everything easy. It makes our mind easier to mold because we're no longer so attached to the storylines that our mind has come up in the past. Once we see how our sense of self has been formed and how it's either majoritarily or wholly impersonal, then our attachments to our patterns, mental frameworks and beliefs that are holding us back weakens significantly. And when this weakens, change becomes easier and easier to access. We become fluid however we want to be and to whoever we want to be. That's the training.